My mother-in-law was reborn, and her very first act in this new life was to force my husband to divorce me. She knew that in exactly 3 years, her precious son was destined to become the wealthiest tycoon in the state, smug and arrogant. She proudly paraded a fake heiress into our home, declaring, "My son deserves a high society girl like Chloe. A small town, nobody like you needs to sign the papers and get out." What she didn't know was that the billion-dollar tech empire from our past life was built entirely by my own effort, sweat, and hard work. A cowardly, indecisive fool like him, without me, would leave the two of them forever struggling at the very bottom of the social ladder. The memory of my own tragic departure was still a phantom pain in my chest as I hurried back to our Seattle suburban home. I was navigating the rain-slicked streets, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror, instinctively following the familiar route. The moment I pushed open the heavy oak door, the sound of jovial, familiar laughter drifted from the living room, chilling me to the bone. It was my mother-in-law, Eleanor. She was intimately clutching the arm of a young woman, her booming, theatrical voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Chloe, darling, I'm telling you, my Simon is such a gentle, caring soul," Eleanor announced, her tone dripping with manufactured sweetness. "The two of you should spend some time getting to know each other. Who knows, you might just find yourselves wishing you had met years ago." I stepped quietly into the foyer, hidden in the shadows. The woman, Chloe Sterling, feigned a bashful smile, lowering her head as she coyly batted her eyelashes at my husband. "Oh, Mrs. Wright, please don't tease me," she murmured softly. "Simon is a wonderful man, and I am quite fond of him." But alas, my gaze shifted to my husband, Simon. He was staring blankly at Chloe, clearly caught off guard by the sheer directness of this supposed high society girl. Within seconds, his shock melted into visible unadulterated ecstasy. He had always harbored a secret desperation to be a social climber, who married into massive wealth. But no genuine heiress had ever given him the time of day. It was only in our past life that I had been naive enough to be blinded by his charming facade, foolishly throwing myself into the fire pit of his toxic family. "Oh my word, Chloe. So I do have feelings for our Simon," Eleanor practically shrieked, her face crinkling into a wide triumphant grin as she eagerly seized the moment. Assuming the role of a giddy matchmaker, she firmly pressed Chloe's delicate, manicured hand directly into Simon's palm. "I knew it the second I laid eyes on you. You and my son are a perfect match. There is no better time than right now to cultivate those feelings." Simon's face flushed a deep crimson, his eyes fixed on Chloe with a burning intense hunger, making absolutely no effort to pull his hand away, or stop his mother's highly inappropriate behavior. Here was a mother brazenly setting up her newly married son on a blind date, right inside his own home. The sheer shamelessness of the mother-son duo was staggering. Standing there, a suffocating wave of grief washed over me, as I recalled how completely I had been played by these two in my previous life. I had stood by Simon's side when he was nothing, sacrificing my youth and sanity to build the business empire that eventually crowned him as the wealthiest man in the city. And what was my reward? I was forced to endure Eleanor's endless, petty torment and Simon's chilling emotional abuse, culminating in a horrific, agonizing loss on the delivery table, where both my baby and I were lost. Meanwhile, Simon had used the billions I had painstakingly accumulated to marry a beautiful young bride, living out his days in absolute luxury. But fate, it seemed, had eyes. The heavens had mercifully granted me a second chance. Although I had awoken on the exact morning of our second day of marriage, meaning I hadn't bypassed the wedding entirely, I knew in my bones that it wasn't too late. Every mistake could still be undone. What I hadn't expected, however, was to walk right into this bizarre matchmaking scene. This absolutely did not happen in my previous life. Furthermore, I knew for a fact that Chloe Sterling was no billionaire's daughter. She was merely a low-level, incompetent employee I had hired years later after founding my company. Why was she here now, parading in designer knockoffs? A suspicion began to form in my mind. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I stepped out of the shadows and strode into the center of the living room. "Simon, what exactly is going on here?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I stared pointedly at their deeply intertwined hands, asking the question even though I already knew the answer. Simon jumped as if electrocuted. He violently retracted his hand, nervously rubbing the bridge of his nose in a pathetic attempt to hide his guilt, and hurried over to take my coat and bag. "Ah, Diana, you're home early," he stammered awkwardly. "Let me introduce you. This is Chloe. Chloe, this is my wife." "Chloe, is it?" I smiled, a cold, knowing smirk playing on my lips. "You certainly are beautiful." Chloe's eyes flashed with a momentary glimmer of intense disdain. But she quickly masked it with an awkward, rehearsed laugh. "I've heard so much about you," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Simon told me you are an incredible homemaker, exceptionally skilled at taking care of a family. I admire that so much because unlike you, I'm completely useless. I wouldn't even know how to sweep a floor." She lowered her head, pretending to be disappointed in herself. But every single word was a calculated insult, praising me as a mere maid while highlighting her own elevated status. Eleanor immediately sneered, rolling her eyes at me with undisguised contempt. "Oh, Chloe darling, why would a girl like you ever need to do household chores?" she proclaimed loudly. "Only incompetent, worthless women measure their value by sweeping floors. You are a high society heiress who graduated from a prestigious university abroad. Whichever lucky man manages to marry you would be utterly blessed, and he would rightfully worship you like a precious treasure." Eleanor's fawning, sycophantic display was nauseatingly transparent. Eager to impress, Simon nodded vigorously in agreement. "My mother is right, Chloe," he chimed in. "You are entirely different from Diana. Someone of your status shouldn't be subjected to rough labor. Your only job should be looking beautiful, while others wait on you hand and foot." Speaking of which, he turned to me, his tone shifting into one of casual entitlement. "Diana, since you picked up groceries today, why don't you head to the kitchen and show off your skills? Make us something nice, so we can all taste your cooking." I stared at him in disbelief. He had just finished desperately licking the boots of this fake heiress, and now he had the audacity to belittle me and order me around in my own home. I rolled my eyes at him, my voice dripping with icy sarcasm. "Oh no. How could I possibly embarrass myself with my meager cooking skills in front of our esteemed guest?" I replied slowly, savoring every word. "Simon, I'm surprised at you. A distinguished heiress like Chloe is accustomed to dining on truffles and caviar. If you want to host her properly, the absolute minimum you should do is take her to a 5-star hotel for dinner. Making her eat at home, how insulting." If Simon wanted to play the lapdog to this illusion of wealth, I was more than happy to facilitate it. My ultimate goal was to bind the two of them together inextricably. I just couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when they finally discovered their beloved billionaire heiress was a complete fraud. My sharp retort left Simon completely cornered, dangling awkwardly in the silence of our living room. Unable to gracefully back down in front of his new obsession, he forced a tight, unnatural smile. "You're right, I was being inconsiderate," he admitted through gritted teeth. "How about we go to the Seasons downtown for lunch? I'll make a reservation right now." Seeing that neither Eleanor nor Chloe voiced any objections, Simon quickly whipped out his smartphone. But before dialing, he grabbed my arm and dragged me into the hallway out of earshot. "Diana, my bank account is a bit light right now," he whispered furiously, his eyes darting back toward the living room. "Transfer me $10,000 right now, so I can properly treat Chloe." I widened my eyes in exaggerated shock and deliberately pitched my voice to a deafening volume. "You don't even have $10,000 to." "Keep your voice down, are you crazy?" Simon hissed, his face turning purple as he clamped a heavy hand over my mouth. Terrified that Chloe might have overheard, he frantically tried to explain himself. "You know all my savings are tied up with my mother's accounts right now. Just front me the cash for today." I aggressively shoved his hand away, brushing off my shoulder as if he had soiled my clothes. "I don't have that kind of cash on hand either," I lied smoothly. "All my money is still secured in my parents' accounts. If you need it so badly, go beg your mother for it. And don't worry about me. I won't be joining you for lunch, so that should save you a few bucks." Before Simon could argue further, I spun on my heel and marched back into the living room, wearing a radiant smile. Chloe, your charming Simon has already secured a table, I announced cheerfully. It is about a 30-minute drive to the city, so you all better get going. I have things to do. So I won't be crashing your lovely little gathering. I barely had time to finish my sentence before Eleanor, giddy with excitement, hooked her arm through Chloe's and began barking orders at Simon to hurry up and start the car. Simon, thoroughly stressed about his empty wallet, didn't even have the chance to utter another word before his overbearing mother physically dragged him out the front door. I stood on the porch, feigning total indifference as I watched the three of them pile into Simon's sedan and drive away. If Simon was so desperate to latch onto Chloe's imaginary trust fund, then as his loving wife, it was my duty to pave the way. I couldn't help but chuckle softly to myself. A completely broke phony and a lazy, entitled gold digger. Their eventual spectacular downfall was going to be a masterpiece to witness. With Simon out of my way, I knew I had the strategies to rebuild my fortune much faster than in my previous life. Just as I predicted. It wasn't until late that evening that Simon finally returned, accompanied by a severely flushed and ecstatic Eleanor. My mother-in-law burst through the door, weighed down by several glossy designer shopping bags. As she dumped them onto the kitchen island, her smug gaze locked onto me. I was standing in the hallway, calmly zipping up my large suitcase. Eleanor shook her head, adopting a tone of exaggerated pity. Chloe is just so thoughtful and sophisticated, she bragged loudly. We only spent one afternoon together, and she insisted on buying me all these luxurious gifts. Unlike some dumb people who legally hold the title of my daughter-in-law, yet are so incredibly stingy, they wouldn't spare a single dime for me. Simon, I'm telling you, a man should marry a woman exactly like Chloe. Someone from a good family who actually knows how to be generous. Simon nodded emphatically, shooting me a glare filled with toxic resentment. He was still fuming over my refusal to give him the $10,000 earlier that day, and his face twisted into a dark scowl. Diana, the only reason I went against my mother's wishes and married you was because I thought you were frugal and family-oriented, he sneered. But look at yourself. How long have we been together? Name one decent gift you've ever bought for my mother. You even hoard your own money with your parents. Over the course of a single afternoon, Simon's loyalty had completely evaporated. Looking at me now, it was as if he was staring at a piece of trash that was rotting in his pristine hallway. I paused, resting my hand on my luggage handle. Looking at the two of them, I felt a deep hollow sense of irony. You sold out your marriage for a few cheap meals, and some knockoff handbags that probably didn't cost more than a few $100s. I retorted sharply. And how dare you say I never bought her gifts? That heavy gold necklace she is wearing right now, I bought that with my own hard-earned cash. If you hate me so much, take it off and hand it back. While I rarely showered Eleanor with random trinkets, Simon and I had been dating for 2 years before our wedding. Every single time her birthday rolled around, I had generously gifted her either a thick gold necklace or an expensive gold bracelet. Those pieces were worth infinitely more than whatever cheap fabric Chloe had pawned off on them today. Conversely, in all that time, I had never received so much as a greeting card from Eleanor. The memories flooded back. It wasn't just the present, it was the past life too. I had sacrificed my soul to build Simon's company, and Eleanor had never given me a single gift or even a kind word. Because Simon was a spineless mama's boy, her constant hostility eventually bred his chilling cold violence toward me. Neither of them ever acknowledged that without my intellect, he would be absolutely nothing. I am your mother-in-law. Isn't it your absolute duty to honor me? Eleanor shrieked defensively, her hand flying up to clutch the gold necklace, desperately tucking it beneath her collar to hide it. She shot me a look of pure venom. It is just a cheap piece of jewelry, and you actually have the nerve to ask for it back. You are so petty and low class. It is no wonder you look like a doomed, short-lived ghost. Now stop arguing. I'm exhausted from shopping. Go fetch me some hot water immediately. She spat the curse with such casual cruelty. Hearing those words, my entire body went ice cold. The inflection, the sneer, the specific phrasing, it violently hurled me back to the sterile hospital room of my past life. I remembered the exact moment the surgeon had stepped out to hand Simon the critical condition notice. Eleanor had stood there, hands on her hips, spitting those exact words, "Dawenshi is just a doomed short-lived ghost. She can't even birth a child properly. What a useless piece of trash." Swallowing the furious bile rising in my throat, I shot the two of them a look of pure disgust. I hoisted my suitcase, decisively marching toward the front door. "My dad's heart condition is acting up," I stated, my voice dangerously low and suppressed. "I'm going to stay at my parents' house to take care of him for a while. Don't expect me to be your maid." Having already ripped the masks off their faces, the prospect of spending even one more night under the same roof made my skin crawl. Taking advantage of the fact that my father had recently caught a bad seasonal cold, I used his minor illness as the perfect excuse to escape this toxic wasteland. Predictably, upon hearing that I was moving out, Simon stepped forward, opening his mouth to object to the optics of a bride leaving on her second day of marriage. But before a sound could escape, Eleanor sharply elbowed him in the ribs, shooting him a meaningful wide-eyed look. Simon instantly clamped his mouth shut. I watched their silent conspiratorial exchange with grim amusement. I knew exactly what they were thinking. With me out of the house, Simon would have unchecked freedom to relentlessly pursue his billionaire heiress. Fine by me. Even if Eleanor had the advantage of rebirth, she was far too stupid to escape the web I was weaving. I stepped out into the damp Seattle night, hoping they wouldn't disappoint me, and would eagerly dive headfirst into the trap I had laid out for them. Instead of heading directly to my parents' home and worrying them, I drove straight downtown and booked an extended stay at a luxury hotel for an entire month. During this crucial window, my primary objective was to sever every legal and emotional tie with Simon. However, as I stared at the glowing screen of my phone later that night, eyeing the new friend request from Chloe Sterling, I guessed I wouldn't be needing the hotel room for nearly that long. The very next morning, Chloe requested a meeting at an upscale downtown espresso bar. "Diana, let's be realistic here. Simon is destined to achieve massive success in the future," Chloe announced before she had even taken a sip of her artisanal latte. Her chin was tilted upward in an arrogant, haughty angle. "You are completely unworthy of a man like him. I am his true, fated partner." I sat back, calmly observing her theatrical body language. The woman sitting across from me was fundamentally different from the terrified, incompetent intern I remembered from my past life. This version of Chloe radiated an undeniable, albeit delusional, sense of superiority, looking at me with eyes full of condescending pity. My suspicions were definitively confirmed. Like Eleanor, Chloe had also been reborn, granted a second chance at life. Unfortunately for her, she had returned without an ounce of actual intelligence. She knew that Simon was supposedly destined for greatness, and she intended to use her fabricated wealthy background to aggressively secure this high-potential stock before his valuation skyrocketed. Perfect. Chloe and Eleanor would serve as the ultimate, unwitting accomplices in my grand scheme to completely rid myself of Simon. I maintained a mask of absolute serenity, casually stirring my tea. "Frankly, Simon is the one who is unworthy of me," I replied, my tone devoid of emotion. "If there is going to be a divorce, I'll be the one initiating it." "Ha, that is hilarious." Chloe burst into a loud, ungraceful laugh, completely dropping her high society facade. She looked at me as if I were severely brain damaged. "I genuinely hope you won't live to bitterly regret your profound stupidity today. Let's just wait and see. Shall we?" She had arrived fully armed for a vicious, drawn-out screaming match. Terrified that I would cling desperately to my marriage, she was visibly stunned, yet thrilled, when I voluntarily handed over the reins without shedding a single tear. I remained perfectly silent, simply watching her gloat, while my mind rapidly calculated the next phases of my strategy. Based on Chloe's aggressive posturing, I knew she would strike while the iron was hot. Eager to solidify her position, over the following week, I hired a discreet private investigator to tail Simon's every move. Furthermore, during the brief window, when Eleanor and Simon were out shopping on that chaotic second day, I had preemptively installed several hidden Wi-Fi cameras inside the house. With the annoying wife out of the picture, Simon launched a brazen, full-scale romantic assault on Chloe, hemorrhaging whatever meager funds he had left. He took her to exorbitant rooftop lounges and elite restaurants every single night. More importantly, the cameras confirmed that he had eagerly brought her back to our marital home on multiple occasions. Sitting in my high-rise hotel suite, watching the grainy night vision footage, I patiently bided my time. I was a sniper in the dark, waiting for the perfect decisive opening to pull the trigger. It took less than a week for the golden opportunity to present itself. Late Friday night, a heavily intoxicated Chloe stumbled through the front door, supported by a very eager Simon. Under Eleanor's aggressive, whispering encouragement, the two of them staggered into the master bedroom, and the deed was done. I sat in my hotel room, meticulously tracking the time. At exactly 7 a.m., knowing this was the prime hour, when the neighborhood's most notorious busybodies, the elderly women of the local Hoa, began their morning walks. I made my move. I strategically intercepted a large group of them near the park, and feigning a sudden crisis at home, brought the entire flock straight through my front door. Simon, how could you? I shrieked, bursting into the master bedroom. I haven't even been gone a week, and you bring a strange woman into our marital bed. Have you completely forgotten the vows you made to me just weeks ago? I had caught them dead to rights. Startled awake by the commotion, Chloe let out a piercing scream, instinctively burying her face into Simon's bare chest. I stood in the doorway, clutching my chest, delivering a masterclass performance of a heartbroken, utterly destroyed wife. What in the world are you doing? Get out, this is all a misunderstanding, Diana. How dare you bring a mob of strangers into this house? Do you have absolutely no respect for me as your mother-in-law? Simon was still frozen in shock on the mattress, but Eleanor had heard the shouting and sprinted down the hallway, panicking at the sight of the horrified neighbors. She viciously shoved my shoulder, attempting to physically force me out of the bedroom. Caught off guard by her violence, I stumbled backward, glaring at the vicious old woman, who was utterly determined to spin black into white. I raised my voice for the entire neighborhood to hear. Misunderstanding. Your married son is naked in bed with another woman. Are you going to tell everyone I forced her into his arms? Eleanor wanted to play dirty, but I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing hot tears to spill down my cheeks, and buried my face in my hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The elderly women peering over my shoulder had seen enough. Mrs. Higgins, a woman known for her sharp tongue, sighed loudly. Eleanor, for heaven's sake, your son has committed a terrible wrong against poor Diana. He brought a mistress into their home, and you have the absolute gall to blame the victim. Exactly, chimed in Mrs. Gable. Simon, I've seen you walking around the neighborhood with this tramp several times this week. A married man needs to know his boundaries. You can't just toss your lovely wife aside the second some cheap trash catches your eye. If he is doing this weeks after the wedding, imagine what a monster he'll be in a year, another muttered. These women were the absolute epicenter of suburban gossip. Eleanor had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood with her arrogant attitude, making plenty of enemies. Now that they had her cornered, they were mercilessly unleashing years of pent-up resentment. Humiliated by the public dressing down, Simon opened his mouth repeatedly, but his brain completely short-circuited. He couldn't formulate a single word of defense. Eleanor, however, lunged toward me, her face contorted with malicious sneers. Humph, if you can't even keep your own husband satisfied, you only have yourself to blame. If you hadn't abandoned your home right after the wedding, my son wouldn't have strayed. You need to take a long hard look in the mirror. I never wanted you in this family anyway. You're so petty, dragging all these people here to broadcast a minor marital hiccup to the whole world. A surge of genuine rage spiked through me, though I kept up my weeping facade. So, my husband sleeps with another woman, and you're telling the world it is my fault. Of course it is. Who knows what vile things you were doing hiding at your parents' house. Maybe you have a man on the side. Why is it okay for you to mess around? But my son can't. Eleanor spat, her eyes scanning me with pure revulsion, brazenly inventing lies on the spot to destroy my character. Besides, look at yourself. Our Chloe's father owns a massive corporation. She is leagues above you. Mrs. Wright, please, stop arguing with Diana, a soft trembling voice interrupted. Chloe had managed to slip into her clothes. She walked forward, gently grabbing Eleanor's arm. Her face a portrait of innocent tragedy. She turned to me and bowed deeply. Diana, last night was entirely my fault. I drank too much and lost control. Even though I have deeply loved Simon for a long time, I knew he was married and I always tried to suppress my feelings. But since I have committed this terrible sin, I am willing to do whatever it takes to make amends to you. Chloe was truly going for an Oscar. To secure her billionaire future, she was willing to take the entirety of the blame, cementing herself as a tragic, star-crossed lover. Hearing the Harris publicly confess her undying love for her son, Eleanor swelled with immense pride, completely disregarding my presence. Well, since everything is out in the open, let's settle this. Diana, if you can't handle it, then pack your bags and divorce my son immediately. We'll go our separate ways. And you will stop standing in the way of Simon and Chloe's true love. At the word divorce, a predatory gleam sparked in Chloe's eyes. Simon finally found his courage, stepping forward to tenderly grasp Chloe's hand. Chloe, if I divorce her today, will you truly give me a chance? Under his intense gaze, Chloe lowered her eyelashes in mock shyness and gave a firm nod. Overcome with maniacal joy, Simon ignored the crowd of onlookers entirely, scooping Chloe up in his arms and spinning her around the room in a dizzying circle. Eleanor raised a triumphant eyebrow at me, patting her son on the back. Son, your vision has finally cleared. Chloe is 100 times the woman Diana is. She has the elite education, the phenomenal family background, everything. Though this was exactly the outcome I desired, the sheer disrespect of the display warranted a reaction. I clenched my fists tightly. You get caught in bed together, and you dare to flaunt your romance in front of the lawful wife. We aren't even divorced yet. Do none of you have an ounce of shame? Diana, if you are truly that angry, just name a price, Chloe offered magnanimously. I will write you a check for your troubles. Whatever makes you happy. Absolutely not. We are not giving her a single penny, Eleanor screeched, glaring at me with reckless defiance. Diana, if you refuse to sign the divorce papers, that is fine too, but you'll just have to sit in this house every day and watch Simon and Chloe be hopelessly in love. As far as I'm concerned, Chloe is my only true daughter-in-law. Stay if you think you can stomach it. I leveled a cold stare at her. Your son committed adultery. Aren't you terrified that I'll drag your names through the mud until you can never show your faces in this city again? Ha! Do you think I'm stupid? Eleanor scoffed. This is nothing more than a moral dispute. At worst, people will whisper behind our backs. And don't forget, our Chloe is the daughter of a ruthless corporate titan. If anyone dares to spread vicious rumors about us, be prepared for her family to utterly destroy you. As she spoke, Eleanor cast a threatening, sidelong glare at the group of elderly women huddled behind me. I turned to look at them. Diana, sweetie, we didn't actually see anything today. We really should be going. Mrs. Higgins stammered nervously, her previous righteous anger evaporating at the mention of a powerful billionaire's revenge. She grabbed her friends by the arms and began shuffling toward the door. Yes, Diana, this is a private family matter. We outsiders shouldn't interfere. Another added quickly as they scurried out of the house like frightened mice. Seeing her intimidation tactics work flawlessly, Eleanor wagged her finger at me, issuing a blatant threat. You see that, Diana? Even the people you brought here are terrified to cross us. In the real world, money is power. I strongly suggest you quietly sign the divorce papers. Otherwise, who knows what kind of tragic accidents might befall your family. Simon stepped up, his tone adopting a sickeningly fake softness. Diana, let's just part amicably. Don't blame me for being heartless. Human beings naturally gravitate toward better opportunities. He is right, Diana. Please just be the bigger person and give Simon and me your blessing, Chloe pleaded, her eyes shining with fake sincerity. The three of them harmonized perfectly. Expertly flipping the script, to make me look like the bitter villain. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. All right, I'll divorce you. Let's go right now. Shocked by my sudden, effortless compliance, Eleanor let out a victorious gasp. She sprinted to a filing cabinet, frantically shoving Simon's identification documents into his chest. Did you hear her, son? Go to the courthouse right now and finalize it, so you can officially bring Chloe into our family. Simon, snapping out of his daze, beamed with relief and began aggressively hurrying me out the door. I watched the three of them, each bubbling with their own greedy hidden agendas, and obediently followed them to the courthouse. Moving with lightning speed, the divorce was finalized that very afternoon, and driven by their mutual desperation to secure their imaginary fortunes, Simon and Chloe marched straight to another window and officially registered their marriage the exact same day. Standing in the courthouse lobby, I watched my ex-husband and his new bride embrace, both lost in euphoric delusions of their impending wealth. Excellent. Step 1 of my grand design was flawlessly executed. Now, it was time to let three ravenous, greedy people slowly devour each other. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry before I drove straight to my parents' house in the quiet tree-lined suburbs of Bellevue. Stepping through the familiar oak door, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation, completely shedding the suffocating weight of my brief, toxic marriage. I sat my parents down in the living room and calmly explained the entire situation, sparing them the painful details of my past life's conclusion, but making it crystal clear that Simon had committed adultery. Mere days after our wedding, my father, whose mild heart condition had been a source of constant worry, was initially shocked. But that shock quickly morphed into quiet, protective anger. My mother simply held my hands, her eyes brimming with tears of relief that I had escaped before tying myself down with children or a mortgage. With their unwavering support and the toxic parasite of the right family finally excised from my life, I could channel every ounce of my energy into my true objective, my entrepreneurial empire. In my previous life, I had keenly identified a massive untapped goldmine in the tech sector, specifically regarding the software integration for electric vehicles. By capitalizing on federal green energy subsidies and the societal shift towards sustainable transit, I had rapidly accumulated my first pot of gold. I had eventually partnered with top-tier venture capitalists, scaling the company into a billion-dollar titan over 3 grueling years. This time, armed with the undeniable advantage of foresight, I was determined to accelerate the timeline and avoid the agonizing pitfalls of my previous journey. I wasn't just going to ride the wave, I was going to create a tsunami. I liquidated my personal savings and, leveraging my flawless credit and a comprehensive business plan, secured a hefty commercial loan from the bank. Combined, I had exactly $1 million in seed capital. In the grand scheme of the tech world, $1 million was merely a drop in the ocean, barely enough to rent a modest office space in Seattle and hire a skeleton crew of rogue engineers. But it was enough to build a prototype. This time around, I decided to take a much larger, highly calculated gamble. Instead of playing it safe with minor software patches, I aimed straight for the jugular of the automotive industry. I drafted an exhaustively detailed, highly technical proposal for an AI-driven, solid-state battery management system, tailored specifically for the domestic EV market. My primary target was Vanguard Automotive, a legendary, century-old American car manufacturer based in Detroit. I knew from my past life that Vanguard was currently hemorrhaging billions, entirely outpaced and suffocated by the aggressive influx of sleek, foreign EV imports. They were a proud dying dinosaur teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, desperate for a technological miracle to modernize their archaic fleet. If I could secure a strategic partnership with Vanguard, leveraging their massive manufacturing infrastructure with my cutting-edge software, my path to billions would be cut in half. The subsequent 2 months were an absolute marathon of corporate pitching. I practically lived in airports, flying between Seattle, Silicon Valley, and Detroit, aggressively pitching my EV integration blueprint to anyone who would listen. The rejections were brutal and relentless. You're a first-time founder with no legacy automotive background. One smug venture capitalist in Palo Alto sneered, tossing my prospectus onto his glass desk. And you think you can single-handedly save a sinking ship like Vanguard? The feasibility of this project is practically zero, even if the tech works. The manufacturing costs alone will completely bury you. Many elite industry veterans echoed his exact sentiments, aggressively writing me off. But I refused to let their short-sightedness deter me. I had seen the future. I knew exactly where the market was heading, and I was going to be the one waiting at the finish line. Perseverance, fueled by the sheer terror of repeating my past life's failures, eventually yielded results. Through sheer force of will and relentless networking, I finally managed to corner a group of aggressive, forward-thinking venture capitalists who specialized in high-risk, high-reward green tech. They saw the genius in my proprietary algorithms. They understood that the domestic auto market was desperate for a homegrown savior. Armed with their preliminary backing, I finally secured a boardroom meeting with the executive board of Vanguard Automotive. For 6 grueling hours, I stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, defending my EV management architecture against a firing squad of cynical, old-guard executives. I mathematically dismantled their cost anxiety, proving that my software could increase battery efficiency by 30%, while actively reducing their reliance on rare earth imports. After months of agonizing negotiations, endless market research, and rigorous beta testing, the Vanguard Board of Directors officially approved my blueprint. The strategic partnership was signed in indelible ink. Vanguard provided the hardware and the factory lines. My newly founded startup, Aurora Systems, provided the brain, with a monumental corporate platform beneath my feet and an astronomical injection of VC funding. I threw my entire soul into the business. I slept on a cot in my office, surviving on cold coffee and adrenaline. The initial phases of research and development were a logistical nightmare, plagued by supply chain shortages and coding bugs. But I anchored myself to my unwavering faith in my own vision. Meanwhile, miles away from my corporate battlefield, the pathetic illusion orchestrated by Simon and Chloe was rapidly disintegrating. Though I had completely blocked them on all channels, I occasionally received updates from the private investigator I had kept on retainer, just to ensure they weren't plotting against me. The reports were hilariously tragic. As I had predicted, Chloe Sterling was no heiress. She had maxed out 6 high-interest credit cards to fund the designer clothes, the least luxury sedan, and the exorbitant bar tabs used to trick Simon and his greedy mother. Within 2 months of their shotgun wedding, the credit card companies came knocking. The repo men towed away the Mercedes right out of Eleanor's driveway. When the bank accounts completely dried up and the eviction notices began piling up, Simon and Eleanor finally realized they had abandoned a stable, devoted wife for a penniless, debt-ridden fraud. The perfect romance instantly devolved into a nightmare of screaming matches, shattered plates, and vicious resentment. Without my steady income holding up the household, the lazy, cowardly Simon and his entitled mother were rapidly sinking into abject poverty. 6 months after the ink dried on the Vanguard contract, Aurora Systems officially launched its flagship OS. The market response was instantaneous and explosive. Vanguard's new line of integrated EVs sold out entirely in pre-orders, and Aurora's valuation skyrocketed into the stratosphere. I was no longer a struggling housewife or a desperate startup founder. I was the undeniable, undisputed CEO of a tech unicorn. A full year passed, transforming me from a scorned woman into one of the most formidable tech billionaires in the Pacific Northwest. The media dubbed me a visionary. As a testament to my meteoric rise, I was invited as the keynote speaker at the highly prestigious Seattle Young Innovators Summit, representing Aurora Systems on a global broadcast. Standing on that brilliantly lit stage, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, I delivered a flawless presentation to an auditorium packed with the most influential tech titans in the country. I was in my element, untouchable, brilliant, and completely alive. It was precisely this highly publicized television appearance that served as a beacon, drawing the parasitic Wright family straight back to my doorstep. A few days after the summit, my executive assistant buzzed my intercom, her voice laced with confusion. warning me of a disturbance in the main lobby. When I stepped out of the private elevator into the sprawling, glass-walled reception area of Aurora Systems, I froze. At first glance, I genuinely thought I was looking at a complete stranger. The woman standing by the security desk was agonizingly thin, her hair stringy and unkempt. She wore cheap, faded sweatpants and looked utterly exhausted, as if she had aged a brutal 10 years. It took me a full 5 seconds to recognize her as Chloe Sterling, the arrogant, so-called Harris, who had proudly paraded into my living room a year ago. The moment she spotted me, Chloe's eyes widened with a frantic, unhinged desperation. She broke away from the security guards and lunged toward me, screaming hysterically, "Deanna! What is going on? Why isn't Simon the billionaire? Why is it you? What went wrong?" Before I could even process her deranged outburst, Simon and Eleanor shoved their way past the turnstiles, following closely behind her. They both looked equally haggard, reeking of cheap cigarettes and desperation. Their greedy eyes swept over the magnificent, multi-million-dollar architecture of my corporate headquarters, before locking onto me. Simon practically sprinted forward, aggressively pushing Chloe aside with absolute disgust. He slapped on a sickeningly fake, charming smile that made my stomach violently turn. "Diana, my beautiful Diana," Simon gasped, stepping closer. "My mother told me everything about our past life. You and I are fated to be together. It is all this wretched woman's fault. If she hadn't pretended to be a rich heiress to maliciously deceive me, I never would have let you go." Simon glared at Chloe, with a vicious, venomous hatred, before turning back to me. His eyes were practically bulging out of his skull with unrestrained, naked greed. He genuinely believed that a few sweet words and half-hearted apologies would make me instantly hand over the keys to my empire. I felt a wave of profound nausea wash over me. I took 2 swift steps backward, creating a strict physical boundary. "Simon, I have absolutely no idea what insane delusions you are rambling about," I stated, my voice echoing like cracking ice across the marble lobby. "We have been divorced for over a year. I have nothing to do with you. Miss Sterling is your legal wife now." Seeing my absolute rejection, Eleanor forcibly shoved her son aside, stepping up with an eerie, calculating grin. "Oh Diana, darling, you know the old saying, a day as husband and wife means 100 days of grace. You and my Simon were married. You can't just pretend that deep bond doesn't exist. Besides, you're a divorced woman now. It is impossible for you to find a good husband. How can a woman run a massive corporation like this without a strong man to act as the true boss?" Fueled by a breathtaking level of delusional entitlement, Simon eagerly nodded in agreement. "She is right, Diana. I know you're still throwing a tantrum over the divorce, but I forgive you. Don't worry, as long as you transfer the position of CEO and the company shares back to me where they belong, I promise I will remarry you. I'll treat you so well." I stared at the two of them, utterly repulsed by their sheer predatory audacity. They weren't just arrogant. They were thieves trying to orchestrate a daylight robbery. Completely done entertaining their circus act, I raised my hand and signaled to the head of my private security detail standing nearby. "Throw these 3 trespassers out onto the street," I ordered coldly, waving my hand as if swatting away diseased flies. "Do not ever let these pathetic beggars step foot on my property again. If they need money, they can take a tin cup to the subway station. And for the record, everything I own is mine. None of you will ever touch a single cent." "You!" Simon's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage, ready to scream obscenities, but he never got the chance. Before another word could leave his mouth, my heavily armed security team descended. They effortlessly hoisted Simon, Eleanor, and a weeping Chloe by their collars, dragging them kicking and screaming across the polished floors. The entire toxic family was unceremoniously hurled out the front doors, onto the cold Seattle pavement. They stood outside the glass facade, pounding on the doors and screaming profanities for nearly an hour. I didn't spare them a single backward glance, turning on my heel and taking my private elevator back to the penthouse. I knew a parasitic family like the Wrights would never simply surrender and walk away in peace. Especially not when billions of dollars were on the line. Eleanor and Chloe, just like myself, were reborn souls, bearing memories of a future that should have been. Because of that foresight, I remained deeply vigilant. I had initially hoped that by completely severing Simon's path to upward mobility, they would eventually give up and leave me alone. But greed is a powerful, blinding poison. Now, it was glaringly obvious that my entanglement with this family was far from over. Over the next few weeks, Simon and Eleanor became increasingly desperate. Somehow, they had managed to track down my private residential addresses and began aggressively stalking me. They would lurk outside my high-rise apartment and attempt to ambush me in the parking garage. To counter their harassment, I was forced to upgrade my security detail, permanently banning them from the premises of both my home and Aurora systems. I even had my bodyguards actively monitor their movements, but I severely underestimated the depths of their depravity. Having been completely shut out of my life, their twisted minds concocted a horrifying new strategy. They decided to target the only vulnerability I had left: my parents. It was a cold, violently stormy evening in Bellevue. I had decided to stay at my parents' suburban home for the weekend to celebrate my father's improving health. Just after dinner, a frantic pounding echoed through the house, rattling the heavy oak front door. My mother, expecting a late package delivery, pulled it open. She instantly let out a terrified scream. I sprinted to the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing on our front porch, illuminated by the harsh glare of the motion sensor security lights, were Simon and Eleanor. But it wasn't their presence that made my mother scream. It was the broken, injured figure they were dragging across the wet concrete. It was Chloe Sterling. She was severely harmed. Eleanor heaved Chloe's limp body forward, like a sack of rancid garbage, dropping her unceremoniously at my terrified parents' feet. Eleanor slapped on a sickening, subservient grin. "Mr. and Mrs. Mason, if it hadn't been for this wretched, lying woman, my Simon never would have divorced your wonderful Diana. I brought her here tonight to grovel and apologize to you both. Please have mercy on us. Stop being angry. We are meant to be one big happy family." Chloe lay crumpled on the slate tiles of our porch, her hair matted with dirt and mud, her clothes torn and soaked from the rain. She was trembling uncontrollably, her face so severely bruised and swollen, it was entirely unrecognizable. Rainwater steadily dripped from her forehead, pooling on our welcome mat. My mother was absolutely paralyzed with terror, instinctively shrinking back and hiding behind my father's broad shoulders. "Good Lord, what have you done to her?" my mother cried out, her voice shaking. "You need to call an ambulance immediately. She is hurt so badly. What if she passes away right here on our porch?" Despite the disturbing scene playing out before us, Simon leaned casually against the brick pillar of our porch, completely unfazed. He pulled a crushed cigarette from his pocket, lighting it with a cupped hand, and took a long, arrogant drag. "An ambulance? Why waste the money?" he scoffed indifferently, blowing a cloud of gray smoke into the damp air. "She's just cheap trash. A scuffle like this won't break her." To punctuate his horrifying statement, Simon nonchalantly pulled back his foot and delivered a vicious, heavy strike directly into Chloe's ribs. The casual, sociopathic nature of his violence, treating a living, breathing human being as if she were a piece of discarded landfill, sent a violent chill down my spine. Even though I harbored no love for Chloe, witnessing this level of sheer hostility made my stomach churn with disgust. She had certainly deceived the right family, but her lies didn't warrant a near-fatal mistreatment. Besides, Simon and Eleanor were the ones who had eagerly thrown themselves at her, in their desperate pursuit of unearned wealth. I couldn't stand by and watch this any longer. I pushed past my terrified parents and stepped out onto the porch, immediately signaling for the armed security detail stationed in the SUV parked at the end of our driveway. "Restrain him," I commanded my guards, pointing a trembling finger at Simon. "Simon, you absolute monster. Stop right there. Hurting someone to this extent is severe domestic mistreatment. And you belong in a cage." Without hesitating another second, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Requesting both an ambulance and immediate police intervention. Seeing me dial the authorities, Eleanor panicked. She lunged forward, desperately trying to snatch the phone from my hand. "Hey, what are you doing? This is just a minor scuffle," she yelled rapidly, blocking my path. "We brought her here to sincerely apologize to you. And this is how you repay us." "Fine. If you insist on sending her to the hospital, you are paying the medical bills. We don't have a single dime. And listen to me very carefully. Diana, you must promise to remarry my son right now. Transfer all of your company shares into Simon's name immediately." I stared at the deranged old woman, wondering if her brain had finally snapped completely. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, looking at her as if she were an alien. "Do you honestly believe you are above the law? You think you can just dictate demands and everyone will bow down to you?" I must have been completely blind in my past life to ever think Simon was worth anything. "Do you really think I'm that stupid anymore? You're damaged goods. You've been married to my son. No other decent man will ever want you," Eleanor screeched, resorting to her usual vile insults. "If you refuse our terms, that's fine. My son and I will simply camp out on your parents' front lawn every single day. We have nothing but free time. And we will make sure your family never knows a moment of peace again." Following his mother's lead, Eleanor dramatically threw herself onto the wet concrete porch, sitting cross-legged in a defiant protest. Simon's eyes lit up, realizing extortion was their last remaining play. "She is right, Diana," he threatened, puffing his chest out. "If you don't do exactly as my mother says, we will harass you endlessly. If you want your elderly parents to live in peace, you'll sign the papers. You absolute thugs. Have you no respect for the law?" my father roared. His face flushed red with indignation. Utterly appalled by their shameless parasitic behavior, I gently placed a hand on my father's arm to calm him. I had anticipated that these two wouldn't leave without a chaotic scene. But did they truly believe I was the same soft-hearted, easily manipulated Diana from before? The audacity was almost comical. Fortunately, their pathetic extortion attempt only lasted a few more minutes. The wail of police sirens pierced the quiet suburban night. 2 patrol cars swerved into our driveway, and officers quickly apprehended Simon and Eleanor, under my direct instruction. The ambulance arrived seconds later, loading Chloe's unconscious body onto a stretcher. Initially, my plan had been simple: leverage their blatant harassment to ensure the mother-son duo spent a few miserable nights in a holding cell. But looking at the flashing red lights of the ambulance, a much more permanent solution began to form in my mind. I remembered the look of pure, unadulterated hatred Chloe had shot at Simon right before she lost consciousness. If she was willing to testify, we could lock him away for a very long time. I grabbed my coat, instructed my security team to secure the house, and followed the ambulance straight to the emergency room. I personally covered Chloe's admission fees to ensure she received immediate, top-tier medical care. For the next 6 hours, I sat in the sterile, fluorescent, lit waiting room while surgeons operated on her. When the lead trauma surgeon finally emerged, the grim report confirmed my darkest suspicions. The sheer force of Simon's repeated strikes had caused severe internal trauma. Chloe had sustained multiple injuries to her internal organs, resulting in serious health complications. The medical examiner officially classified her condition as severe physical harm. Standing outside her recovery room, gazing at her weary, fragile form hooked up to IV drips and monitors, a haunting wave of déjà vu washed over me. Looking at Chloe, I saw the ghost of my past self, the isolated, tormented woman left to pass away in a lonely, agonizing moment in a hospital bed, while the Wright family celebrated. The next morning, Chloe finally regained consciousness. She slowly opened her swollen eyes, her gaze fixing on the white ceiling tiles for a long, heavy silence. Then, she slowly turned her head and saw me sitting quietly in the visitor's chair. "Diana, let's make a deal," she rasped, her voice weak but laced with an icy, terrifying resolve. "Help me if you help me. I swear I will testify against Simon for severe domestic abuse. I want him to suffer the exact retribution he deserves." I remained perfectly still, my legs elegantly crossed, projecting an aura of total calm. However, my guard was completely up. I was dealing with a fellow time traveler, who had already proven she was a master of deceit. And why should I trust you? I asked coolly. What makes you think I have any interest in helping you? Chloe offered a bitter, self-deprecating smile, her cracked lips dry and sore. Because you don't want these leeches clinging to you for the rest of your life either. I was foolish. I was blinded by greed, trying to steal a destiny that didn't belong to me. And now look where it got me. You don't even have to get your hands dirty, Diana. Just use your influence to keep Simon and Eleanor locked in that precinct for a few days. The minute I can walk out of this hospital, I will personally destroy them in a courtroom. The absolute finality in her bruised eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had nothing left to lose, and a woman with nothing to lose was the deadliest weapon of all. This arrangement aligned perfectly with my ultimate objective. I slowly stood up from the chair, buttoning my designer coat. Focus on healing, I said, my voice dropping to a low decisive whisper. The wicked will only pay their dues if you are strong enough to deliver the final blow. I left the sterile environment of the hospital and was driven straight to the downtown police precinct. I didn't come empty-handed. I brought Chloe's certified, horrifying medical evaluation directly to the lead detective handling the case. The detailed medical photographs of her ruptured internal organs and deep contusions were all the evidence the state needed. Because of the severity of the medical report and my explicit allegations of organized harassment, bail was immediately denied. Simon and Eleanor were temporarily remanded in county jail, locked in cold, concrete cells, utterly isolated from the outside world. Over the next few days, while Chloe recovered in a private suite I had secured for her, she officially filed criminal charges against Simon for aggravated harm and domestic abuse. I didn't stop there. I reached out to my corporate legal team and retained one of the most ruthless, high-profile prosecutors in Seattle to represent Chloe as special counsel. I gave the lawyer a blank check and a single uncompromising directive. Ensure Simon Wright spends as many years rotting in a maximum security prison as the law physically allows. With my vast financial resources silently paving the way, the bureaucratic red tape vanished. The legal machinery moved with terrifying efficiency, securing trial dates and gathering airtight forensic evidence. The trap was set, the steel jaws pulled back and waiting. Simon and Eleanor were about to face a nightmare they could never manipulate their way out of. With my vast financial resources silently paving the way, the legal machinery moved with terrifying efficiency. The trial of Simon and Eleanor Wright became a highly publicized spectacle in the Seattle courts. A chilling showcase of domestic hostility, fueled by delusional greed. When Chloe finally took the witness stand, a hush fell over the packed wood-paneled courtroom. She was no longer the arrogant, faux Harris who had strutted into my living room. She was a shattered survivor, her face still bearing the faint, yellowing shadows of severe contusions. Under the gentle guidance of the high-profile prosecutor I had hired for her, Chloe bravely stripped away the final layers of the Wright family's twisted dynamic. She revealed to the jury that the horrifying incident on my parents' porch was not an isolated event. The physical abuse had actually started months prior. Beginning the exact moment Simon discovered Chloe had lied about her billionaire background and was drowning in credit card debt. Initially, the violence was measured, a harsh slap here, a vicious shove there, but as the reality of their self-inflicted poverty set in, and fueled by Eleanor's constant, venomous instigation, Simon began using Chloe as a literal punching bag to vent his frustrations over divorcing me. The physical attack that landed her in the trauma ward was the culmination of his rage, triggered by his agonizing regret that I had become a tech billionaire while he was left with nothing. Through it all, Chloe had endured the torment in silence, too intimidated by Simon and Eleanor's unhinged, shameless behavior to seek help. It was only when she was dragged to my doorstep, nearly completely broken as a prop in their extortion scheme, that she finally found the courage to strike back and send these two demons to prison. The jury was visibly horrified, but Simon and Eleanor remained shockingly oblivious to the gravity of their crimes. Their profound ignorance of the law was staggering. When the prosecutor presented the forensic photos of Chloe's damaged organs, Simon actually stood up at the defense table, his face red with indignation. "She is my wife," Simon bellowed, his voice echoing through the stunned courtroom. I am the man of the house. What is the crime in a husband disciplining a lying, deceitful wife? On what grounds are you locking me up? A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Simon, refusing to back down, whipped his head around and locked eyes with me sitting quietly in the back row. He pointed a trembling, furious finger in my direction. Diana, it is you, isn't it? He screamed, his eyes rolling with madness. You bribed the police and the judge to help this worthless woman. You did all this just to send me to prison because you're still obsessed with me. It won't work. Not to be outdone, Eleanor ripped her arm away from the bailiff, attempting to restrain her, throwing herself onto the courtroom floor in a classic display of theatrics. Your Honor, police. You cannot listen to these two wicked women, she wailed, pounding her fists on the carpet. My son and I are completely innocent. We are the victims here. They are framing us. Despite the mother and son's shameless attempts to turn the courtroom into a circus and twist black into white, the mountain of forensic evidence, medical reports, and expert testimonies was absolutely insurmountable. Even if they possessed 10 mouths each, they couldn't argue their way out of the facts. I sat in the gallery with my legs elegantly crossed, watching their pathetic meltdown with cold detachment. I didn't utter a single word in retaliation. The law, under the watchful eyes of the public, is fiercely impartial. It will inevitably punish those who commit heinous crimes. There was no need for me to waste my breath arguing with doomed criminals. After a brief deliberation, the judge delivered a crushing verdict. Simon Wright was found guilty of aggravated assault and severe domestic abuse, sentenced to 8 grueling years in a state penitentiary. Eleanor, as an active accomplice who had instigated the violence and attempted to cover it up, was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, while 8 years in a high-security prison was a fitting end for a cowardly abuser like Simon. I found myself unsatisfied with Eleanor's fate. 6 months behind bars was merely a slap on the wrist for a woman whose soul was entirely rotted with malice. She was the true architect of the misery in both my past life and this one. A woman far more ruthless and cunning than her spineless son. I wasn't about to let her walk free after half a year to plot a new reign of terror. So, I decided to play my final card. The person who harbored the deepest, most visceral hatred for Eleanor Wright in this world, second only to myself, was undeniably Chloe. A few days after the verdict, I visited Chloe at her physical therapy session. I didn't give her a set of instructions, I merely planted a seed. 6 months flies by incredibly fast, I murmured casually, looking out the window at the Seattle skyline. You should be extremely careful. When Eleanor gets out, her son will be locked away. She will have nothing left, and she will undoubtedly come looking for revenge. She will blame you for everything. Chloe paused her stretches, her eyes narrowing as the profound implication of my words washed over her. A slow, chilling smile spread across her healing face. She perfectly understood the assignment. Don't worry, Diana, she replied, her voice steady and resolute. Leave Eleanor to me. I have the perfect way to handle my beloved mother-in-law. Because of this unspoken pact, Chloe made a highly strategic legal move. She intentionally halted her divorce proceedings. As long as they were legally married, Chloe remained Simon's lawful spouse, and by extension, Eleanor's closest legal family member on the outside. For 6 months, Eleanor sat in a cramped cell, undoubtedly counting down the days until her release, obsessively plotting her revenge against Chloe and her grand scheme to extort me for millions. But the very morning Eleanor was released from the county jail, she didn't find freedom. Instead, she walked through the prison gates and was immediately intercepted by a private medical transport van. Using her legal status as Eleanor's daughter-in-law, combined with Eleanor's documented history of hysterical, delusional outbursts in the courtroom, Chloe had quietly petitioned the state. She presented Eleanor as a severe danger to herself and others. A woman suffering from violent psychological delusions of wealth and persecution. Chloe didn't hesitate. She legally committed Eleanor Wright to a highly secure, state-run psychiatric facility. Eleanor was dragged kicking and screaming into the pristine white halls of the asylum. She would be well fed, clothed, and medicated, But she was entirely stripped of the one thing she cherished most: her freedom. She would spend the rest of her days trapped behind reinforced doors, screaming to deaf nurses that she was the mother of a billionaire. Her words dismissed as the tragic ramblings of a broken mind, with Eleanor permanently locked away in a padded room, and Simon facing nearly a decade of brutal prison reality. The parasitic Wright family was completely and utterly eradicated from society only after she had personally ensured Eleanor's permanent institutionalization. Did Chloe finally file the paperwork to finalize her divorce from Simon on the day the judge officially dissolved the marriage, severing the final tie to that cursed bloodline? Chloe packed a single suitcase and left Seattle. She was entirely stripped of her delusions of grandeur, leaving the city as quietly as a ghost to start a new, humble life far away from the wreckage she had helped create. The afternoon she boarded her flight, a courier arrived at the executive penthouse of Aurora Systems, delivering a small meticulously wrapped package addressed directly to me. Inside, I found a handwritten letter. In it, Chloe offered a profound, formal apology for her past arrogance, her greed, and the chaos she had brought into my orbit. She thanked me for giving her the leverage to enact her revenge, and swore I would never see her face again. I read the letter once, dropped it into the roaring fireplace of my office, and watched the flames consume the final remnant of my past life's trauma. My life finally returned to a state of absolute, unbreakable peace. Unburdened by the emotional vampires that had once drained my spirit, I poured every ounce of my intellect, passion, and energy into my empire. Over the course of the next year, Aurora Systems didn't just grow, it dominated. We successfully launched our proprietary EV battery architecture globally, expanding our reach beyond Vanguard Automotive and securing contracts with international transit grids. I took the company public in a highly anticipated IPO that shattered Wall Street records. The financial injection elevated Aurora Systems to an entirely new echelon of the tech industry, cementing my status not just as a billionaire, but as a pioneering titan of the modern era. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my boardroom, looking out over the glittering expanse of the Seattle skyline, I took a deep, steadying breath. I remembered the cold, agonizing hospital bed of my previous life. I remembered the sneers, the betrayal, the suffocating despair. But as the golden hour light washed over my reflection in the glass, those memories felt like a distant, fading nightmare. The heavens had given me a second chance, and I had grasped it with both hands. I had rewritten my destiny.